Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the last session of this international conference that has been very enriching and delightful. Right now, we're going to close this beautiful journey with a panel of experts. To give you a little bit of context, the 12th International Conference was named Teaching During COVID, Teaching English During COVID. So right now we are in the post-pandemic era. And since COVID and the pandemic confinement pushed us to find new ways of reaching students in their houses, technology arose, and we had an abrupt change of methodology, and many things have happened since then. Nowadays, we're going gradually back into the classroom, and we have gathered 3 experts today so they can give us some of their insights from their own perspective, depending on the platform in which they work, in research, in writing, and in teacher development. Let me introduce the experts. We have Dr. Dudley Reynolds, and he's going to be talking about the role of English teaching organizations such as universities and TESOL, and how these institutions are prepared to support teachers as they face new challenges. We have Dr. Paul K. Matsuda, and he's going to be talking about the role of research on TEFL and TESOL in the post-pandemic, and how findings can help the field strengthen these fields. And we have Dr. Lilika Khoury. She's going to be talking about challenges after the pandemic and how Europe is facing such challenges. Each expert is going to have 15 minutes, and you can start asking questions right away in the chat. I will read them at the end. We're going to have a 15-minute block after each of their participations so they can answer your questions. So I invite you to pay attention and to enjoy this delightful panel. Dr. Dudley Reynolds, it's your turn to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomas. That's I'm often humbled when somebody says, I want to hear from the expert, because I'm a real believer that the experts are in the classroom. And so the experts are our audience today. They're the ones that see the change happening right in front of them. I do hope I can sort of zoom out a little bit from the classroom and think about the larger context that we find ourselves in today. The charge that was given to me was to think about the role for both universities and professional associations. And if we think historically what their role has been, we typically focus it on the notion of professional development. We think of universities as providing primarily what's called in or pre-service teacher education, right? That they are preparing people to go into the classroom. And once people get into that classroom, professional associations like HELTA in Honduras, the TESOL International Association, IATEFL, and language teacher associations around the world kind of pick up the job, right? And the professional associations often collaborate with ministries of education, publishing companies. In this instance, we're collaborating with the US State Department's RELO and English Specialist Program, right? But we think of the mission primarily in terms of making sure the teachers know what they need to know, right, in order to do their jobs well. Now, I think we need to take a step back, and we need to have a broader view of the role of teachers. And especially when we begin to think about the changes that are happening in our world. The pandemic is just one of the many challenges that we have faced, right? We see more migrants today than probably ever before in history, right? People who are having to leave the country that they thought they would grow old and die in, right? And instead, they're trying to make it to a new place because there's war in their country, there's famine, or there's simply a dysfunctional political system, right, that denies people economic opportunity. So whatever it is, we have a world on the move. We also are facing climate instability at a scale that none of us have ever seen, right? And I think we increasingly are seeing a world where, and I think this is the after effect, in a sense, of we all thought globalization was going to bring about this perfect world, and it hasn't brought about a perfect world. And instead, it has brought about a world where people are more and more competing with each other for dominance. And all of these sort of issues and problems have a big impact on language classrooms, right? We have students who need to learn new languages so that they can simply survive in new places. But we also have students who don't necessarily even feel that they've got the resources to attend school. They wonder if they're ever going to be able to graduate, right? So because they're facing a lot of insecurity at home. And all of this is happening in a world where, as I've been talking about for the past 2 days, technology is changing everything we ever knew, in a sense, at a pace that's faster than many of us wondered or thought was possible. It's created a situation where teachers are nervous, right? We know what we can bring, right? I think we've had a lot of experience in the classroom. We know the difference that we can make in people's lives. But we're worried that a politician somewhere or a school president, right, is going to say, well, we don't really need you anymore. There's a pretty major incident that's just recently happened in the United States, where a university said, you know what, we don't need language teachers anymore. They're expendable. And they're shutting down they're shutting down a TESOL program. They're shutting down the teaching of world languages because they have a budget crisis, right? Well, I don't think that's going to happen in my university, but it still makes me nervous. So what does that mean if we go back to the role for universities and the role for professional associations? I think it means that we all have to take responsibility for doing more than thinking about just providing pedagogical training, all right? That will always be the core of what we do. How do we introduce language to people for whom it's new? Where do we start? What are ways to help them remember it? What are ways to build confidence? That will always be the core of what we do. But increasingly, I think we also have to train and help teachers develop their abilities as advocates for themselves, advocates for their students, for the lives that their students want to live. And that has a role in pre-service education, teacher education. It has an important role in the work that professional associations do. Several of my colleagues here on Zoom, I believe, shared an incredible experience with me about 6 years ago in Athens, when the TESOL International Association called together leaders in the field, researchers, people from ministries of education, language professional associations around the world to come together and say, where is our profession going? What is the future of the TESOL profession? And we published out of that an agenda, but we called it an action agenda for the future. And I thought it might be interesting as I was preparing for this to go back and say, well, what were we saying 6 years ago was going to be important for the future? And has it stood the test of time, especially when we've seen this thing called a pandemic that came along very shortly after that summit? So let me share with you for a moment the 5 sort of priorities that those of us who'd attended agreed upon. And I want to throw them out as things that I think have stood the test of time, that are still priorities, and that, in a sense, talk to the role that universities need to be playing, that professional associations need to be playing, but also every one of us who's listening to this panel today. The first priority was to strengthen the status and visibility of the profession. Right? We are professionals, we belong to a profession, and we have to constantly remind the society that we live in that the profession exists and we are professionals. Treat us as such. Okay? Consult us when you want to decide what age English should be introduced into the curriculum. Consult with us when you want to talk about curriculum standards. Consult with us when you want to talk about teacher licensing. All right? Don't come at it from the outside, but make this a conversation. As the events in the United States at the University of West Virginia demonstrate, I don't think that's just as much an issue today as it was 6 years ago. And unless we speak up, all right, it's going to continue to be an issue. The second priority called for redesigning English language education programs to foster global engagement. Historically, and I mentioned this the other day in my plenary, I said, historically, we've taught English as if it's a standalone phenomenon, as if all we needed to do was develop resources in English, and we treated our learners and our students as if they didn't already know a whole lot about language. Well, research tells us that that's really such a false perception, right? That our students are multilingual, and that's something that we should be building on every day in the classroom. We should treat our students not as beginners, students who don't know anything, but rather as students who know a lot, and we're helping them to expand, right? And that when we do that, we move past an era where English language teaching was really a form of colonialism, right? It was a form of empowering countries where English was used all the time and depowering countries and places and people for whom English was a foreign language, right? Or a lesser known language. That's not our world today. And we have to teach our students and we have to design our education systems to do that. The third priority is to mobilize leaders to confront and embrace the challenges and complexities of English language teaching. I've been saying there's a lot of change happening. And that change means things like students are being exposed to many languages at a much younger age. They're also often being exposed to languages as much outside of the classroom as they are in, through social media, through other types of entertainment media, through hearing a multitude of languages in their own home around the dinner table. I live in Qatar, where English is a lingua franca, right? My students who I'm helping to develop their abilities in English hear just as much English in the grocery store as they do in my classroom. And that means that the models that we had for what language education should look like don't really hold anymore. And I think we need to constantly be thinking about that from a design perspective. How do we design language teaching in a way that meets where the world is? The fourth priority calls for expanding the capacity for inclusive and comprehensive research. And I think Paul's probably going to be talking about this some shortly. And so I don't want to say much other than I want to continue to advocate for partnerships between teachers and researchers, especially in our field. And there's so much expertise. There's so many research questions that pop up every day in classrooms. The final priority is to cultivate a culture of innovation that is responsive to global trends, right? We're going to have to be on our toes, right? The world is changing. If you had told me 6 months ago that I would try and give a plenary that had the name ChatGPT in it, I would have told you you're crazy. Especially because it's something I had just barely heard of. I had never dealt with it in my own classroom, right? And I was highly suspicious of anything that in the way of language that could be produced by a machine. But that was 6 months ago, right? And the world is different today. And I have to be responsive. And so I'll bring what I've been saying to a close, but I think that it's interesting to me that the priorities for then, I think, still serve us well. And I encourage people to, if they have the chance, to go to the TESOL website, the TESOL International website, and search on there for the agenda for the future of the TESOL profession, right? And they have it available under their papers and position statements on the website. So, Tomas, I'm going to stop there. I hope I'm close to my 15 minutes.
You are, Dr. Reynolds. Thank you very much. We have to focus on strengthening the status of our profession, definitely, and redesigning the education programs. That's a huge task that organizations and universities have toward the future. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. We're going to continue with Dr. Paul K. Matsuda and the role of research on the post-pandemic and how findings can strengthen TEFL and TESL. Dr. Matsuda, your microphone. There you go. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Tomas. I was going to say that we have gotten better at using technology as a result of the pandemic, but I guess we can still improve further. So I want to make a comment about the notion of post-pandemic first, because this notion didn't start circulating in the last few weeks. It's actually been around since 2020. For this pandemic, we were all hoping for a post-pandemic that didn't happen, and again and again and again. And while we were talking about the post-pandemic and also the new normal, many people were imagining something grand or unified and coherent, which also didn't happen. Post-pandemic actually literally means after the pandemic, and that's what we have. The pandemic is safely behind us, crossing my fingers, and still COVID is there in various iterations, and people are still being affected, but it does not have the kind of impact that it once had on all of our lives. And I'm thankful for that transition. But having said that, what we can expect in the post-pandemic era is not a coherent historical period or coherent concept that we can all share, but a continuation of what we have been doing, plus some carryovers from the lessons that we learned during the pandemic. And during my plenary talk, I shared some of the lessons that I learned through both personal and professional activities during the pandemic. And here's the list, and I can't share my screen, so I'm going to just talk about them one by one. One of the most important lessons that I learned, and many of us learned, was the importance of being flexible. The situation can change anytime, and it can change fast. And some of the situations, restrictions are unexpected. So we need to be flexible in responding to different situations, different concerns, different policies, and so forth. And so we've all gotten better at being more nimble in teaching and researching. And technology, we've gotten used to using videos and video conferencing, online conferences, and online modules for teaching out of necessity. Some people were resistant to teaching online or using technology of any kind in the classrooms, but now we are equipped with better knowledge and skills and tools that we can bring back to in-person classrooms as well. And along with the incorporation of technology in teaching and also the proliferation of social media, communication has become much more integrated and multimodal. So today's literacy and being able to use language isn't independent of other modes of communications and meaning making. So continuing with that theme is also an important agenda moving forward. And because of the problems of misinformation or intentional distortion of reality in some cases, we have learned to become much more critical in evaluating information that's out there. And the level of critical awareness that we have seen during the pandemic, we were forced to see develop during the pandemic, actually echoes the kind of critical awareness that we have always been trying to instill in our students as we teach students to critically evaluate their academic sources or sources that they're citing. And so that's also an important trend to carry over to the post-pandemic period. And the importance of self-care and attention to emotional needs have become much more important. students were already becoming vulnerable in general. I have seen that graduate students were having more issues with their emotions and psychological well-being, and undergraduate students as well. And during the pandemic, that tendency was exacerbated. And so we have learned to attend to our own well-being and our students' well-being much more than we were able to do in the past, before the pandemic. And work-life balance, and the importance of learning new skills during the pandemic also helped us become better teachers and more reflective. And the ability to reflect on what we do and to learn from it has become an essential skill during the pandemic. And those are the things that we should carry over to the new era that we are facing. And all of these lessons actually corresponds coincidentally with the research trends that were emerging. And so I can't say that the new trends emerged as a result of the pandemic, but rather the new trends were already happening, and the pandemic provided an additional impetus for us to pay attention to these new strands of research. And here are some of my, some of them, the list of 5 research directions that I have identified that is closely related to what we have been experienced during the pandemic. Number 1, this is a big item, is technology and AI. Research on technology has always been there. There are groups of researchers who have been exploring the implications of using technology and recognizing that technology is not an option, but it's here to stay and we need to face it. But many teachers have been resistant to incorporating technology. And in some cases, technology was not available to students. But during the pandemic, we have gotten better at incorporating them. So more integration, more dialogue between people who study technology integrated language instruction and general language teachers and language teaching researchers is going to be an important agenda moving forward. And along with the technology in general, the introduction or the awareness of AI technology, as Dudley just mentioned, this year actually, is going to boost more conversations and more research on the use of AI. And I've seen some teachers resist AI and say, tell students that we can't use AI because that's going to interfere with your learning. But that's if we are teaching in the old way. I think one of the agendas, and this is both research agenda and teaching agendas, is to try to understand the implications of AI and realize that it's not going to go away. And we need to prepare students for literacy that incorporates AI as part of our processes and assessment. And also related to technology, my second bullet point is multimodal composition. Because of the use of social media during the pandemic, we have become much more used to using multimodal composition. And incidentally, research on multimodal composition was beginning to speed up just before the pandemic. And now we have an opportunity to integrate our renewed understanding and interest in multimodal communication into our teaching practices. And the research, again, in multimodal composition is aligned with the general research on technology and language instruction. That is, multimodality is here to stay. It's always been there. We just didn't recognize it. We were in denial. And instead of saying, studying whether multimodal composition can help or not, we need to accept the fact multimodal composition is part of students' literacy experience, and we need to think about how we can enhance those experiences. And another line of research that is emerging is language teaching and language writing teaching instruction beyond academic context. We have spent so much time focusing on helping students develop academic writing skills. But as Ilona Lecky pointed out over 10 years ago, not everybody is going to be an academic in the future. So why is it so important to focus on perfecting students' academic writing skills or language skills so that they can speak like sociologists or psychologists or economists when they're not going to become one of those things? And so paying attention to how language is actually being used around the world, in the workplace, in personal contexts, and providing resources for students to navigate in academic context as well as non-academic context is going to be an important research agenda. And that also goes hand in hand with how we reconceptualize what we do and why we do it. And addressing the issues of personal well-being and emotional vulnerability among students and teachers that we have become keenly aware of during the pandemic. The research on emotion and language use, as well as language learning and teaching, is a growing area of research. And paying more attention to how emotion interferes with what we do, as well as it can enhance what we do, is an important agenda moving forward. And finally, that we also started discussed this in terms of how colonialism and the dominance of the English language has had an impact on the spread of the English language and the learning of the English language. And he also mentioned that we need to move beyond these colonial mentality. And along the same line, there is a new emerging research agenda, which is called critical language awareness. And not just teaching language as a tool for communication, but also helping students become more aware of the power dynamics and the social infrastructure that imposes certain positionality on language learners across the world, around the world. So that research agenda also needs to be closely tied to what we do in the classroom. And so, as I said in my plenary talk, post-pandemic pedagogy is not something entirely new or something that is directly connected to the pandemic, but the critical awareness and reflections on the experience from our pandemic years can help us identify and prioritize our research and teaching agendas. If we continue to keep our eyes open and be open-minded about the new challenges that we are going to face. That's my 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matsuda. Yes, continuation and carryovers. I love that because we need to keep our minds open and we need to keep teaching critical awareness to students. They need to assess their sources in a better way if they want to use technology as a tool and a friend to develop their language skills. With these trends that Dr. Matsuda has shared toward research in the near future, I'm going to continue with Dr. Lily Kakuri, And she's going to close this panel with the challenges after the pandemic and how Europe is facing them. So, Dr. Khoury, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you, gentlemen, for having covered some areas that I'm not going to cover. And on purpose, as a matter of fact, because representing or talking about Europe, you all know that we're talking about an idiosyncratic situation. Anyway, I prepared a PowerPoint, and I hope I'm not going to have the luck that I had just an hour ago. So David, would you make me a co-host, please? And we'll just, and in this way, we're not going to be delayed, I hope. Thank you.
Right.
You are fantastic, David. Here we go. And this is Europe. And let's just look at it and look at the diversity. And I know that I'm talking to people from South America where there is another diversity and all that. But think of all of the languages here and so on and so forth. Europe, 44 different countries, languages, histories, customs, music, songs, dance, national idiosyncrasies. One common characteristic, a tremendous interest in TEFL and professional development. And all of us follow the Common European Framework, or the CEF, as we refer to. And this is important. And yes, as Thomas said, I'm going to, let's say, discuss more about the role of the teachers and teacher development and what happened to all of us during the pandemic. I'll just take 2 steps back in a way so I can come forward. Regarding TEFL, which we usually refer to as ELT in general, but anyway, each country has its own specific laws, schemas, philosophies, and formats, pretty much the same methodology, as we've been influenced by the UK, by England tremendously. They were the forerunners, those who somehow trained the rest of us in Europe and probably in other parts of the world. Now, some countries are more advanced in terms of methodology and more advanced than others. And in some countries, both the state and private sectors are very active. And when I say the private sectors, what I mean is special, not let's say the general school, but special language schools, and not just English language, but German, French, Spanish, Italian, Russian, Chinese, Arabic, and so on. In my country, for instance, in Greece, foreign languages are primarily, they are taught in the state schools, but primarily they're taught in the private language schools. The role is to teach language, and most of them operate in early afternoon till late evening. In other countries, one sector is more advanced than the other. In Portugal, for instance, the state sector is extremely advanced and the teachers are very active. In Greece, the private sector is more advanced and active, and the state sector is too. One thing is for sure, and you will excuse my French, and it is shared by all of us, COVID-19 gave us a big kick in the derrière, and we all landed smack into the 21st century, especially regarding technology. And I'm glad that Lee Reynolds talked about technology and what he said, how we were not prepared, and Paul Matsuda. But in actuality, we had to learn online teaching overnight. So we all joined forces. It was amazing. It was, on one hand, it was very scary. And on another hand, it was amazing because we joined forces, both state and private sectors, and we started sharing knowledge, and some knowledge already acquired. But as Paul Matsuda said, many of us were hesitant in terms of using technology, but we all started using it. Now I can't get them off using technology as a teacher educator. I have a really hard task to convince them that we can do something else other than technology. It's amazing what we learned. Now, the benefits from the pandemic: we learned new tools, flexible ways, amazing online teaching techniques, and so on. And we learned to be grateful and to appreciate all we used to have: proximity, touch, the ambiance of the classroom, which almost, very few of us really appreciated in the past, the warmth of human presence and the importance of everyday freedom. As we did have all of these lockdowns. The teachers' associations helped a lot. The European TESOL affiliates, TESOL International affiliates, the IATEFL associates, TESOL International itself, and IATEFL. We all started offering free webinars, free programs to train the teachers to use technology. In some cases, there were new associations that were founded. In Greece, for instance, the state school teachers founded the Distant Learning State School Teachers Association, which is very active and continues to be active with fantastic activities, techniques, lesson plans. By the way, ChatGPT came out into the world on November 30th, 2022. This Teachers Association uploaded in Facebook a children's fairy tale in early February. You do see how fast and quickly everybody worked. And we became even more active. For instance, in the Middle East, TESOL Gulf was created during the pandemic and was extremely active. Now, a pat, on the shoulder. TESOL Greece was ahead of everybody. 35 days after the first COVID-19 lockdown in Greece, and just about the rest of the world. And we organized the first international online event, Daring the Virus, to support, encourage teachers, 50 distinguished speakers. We started April 25th and finished at the end of June. None of us ever believed or expected we would do something like that. And I've got to say, and you can see it, I'm really proud of it. Okay, right. Europe in 2023. In all countries, both state and private sectors have gone back to in-person teaching, especially regarding teaching children and teenagers. In some, most actually, but in especially the southern countries, and one can understand why, university students and adults prefer online teaching, and they have remained there. And very few tried hybrid. We tried it at the beginning, but it didn't work. What we do now, and what we try to help the teachers be able to accomplish, is when in the private schools and also the state schools, if it is possible, when a child is sick for a week or so, to be able to attend, to use hybrid and be able to attend. However, I must say that it is one of the most demanding ways of teaching hybrid. Let's accept it. And the teachers who are willing to do it are heroes or heroines. Okay, now technology has become the major part of everyday teaching, as I said earlier. Platforms like Kahoot, Padlet, Quizlet, Answer Garden, Vocaroo, blogs, wikis, Canva, ChatGPT, Quillbot, everything are being used extensively. Yes, at the beginning, everybody was afraid of artificial intelligence, especially, as most teachers say, thinking of cheating, asking the students to write a composition and running it through ChatGPT or AI or whatever, all of these tools, and then not being able to know whether it is the student's work or not. I would say, excuse me, bull feathers. You know what your students can do. And I have found out that I've used it with my students, especially this last year that I was in Riyadh. I had them write, and I believe Paul Matsuda said this when yesterday when you had your talk. I may have mixed it up between Dudley and you, but anyway, the point is when you said writing yourself and then running it through to see how it is indeed in correct, let's say in native English. And this is actually an excellent activity. What is interesting is that Facebook mainly and LinkedIn have become the not social media, I call them the sharing media among ELT teachers throughout Europe and internationally. We share approaches, techniques, activities, which is really excellent. The challenges. Well, first of all, the major lesson we all got, all of us throughout the world, anticipate and welcome change. And all the things that both Dudley and Paul said earlier, everything depends on our mentality and our attitude as teachers to learn, to be able to anticipate and welcome change and to be ready to face it and to adopt it knowingly in capital letters. How? Well, first of all, by realizing that the future is now. The future is not tomorrow or next year. The future is now. We need to identify, as the futurists say, we need Dean van Leeuwen, very difficult last name. I hope he forgives me and pardons me for that. But to identify the gray elephants in TEFL and to be ready, as Alvin Toffler once said, to unlearn, relearn, rethink, reinvent, not to go overboard with technology, and most importantly, to keep developing professionally. Nothing should be taken for granted and nothing should be assumed. This is our challenge, not only in Europe, all over the world. And I find it inspiring because I believe we are fortunate to be practicing one of the most creative, inspiring, rejuvenating, humane and mindful professions in the world. And we should be grateful that we have this opportunity, whether some people, as Dudley said, might think we are dispensable or not. We're not. We give our learners, we open windows to the mind because we let them enter new worlds through the foreign languages. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you. Am I within my 15 minutes? I am.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Khoury. Yes.
I'm not a doctor. Just call me Lilika Khoury, please. And there's nothing wrong with doctor, but I'm not.
I can't, but I'll try in my mind. It's a great exercise to be with you in here because I feel once again in the classroom taking notes, and I have to follow the train of thought of each of you, and it's fascinating to you know, to get your brain so stimulated with so many different ideas from 3 different perspectives, coming from people who have a lot of experience researching, writing, training teachers, and you know, making us be better, inspiring us to be better. So in this final participation, we could see that if you are a creative teacher, if you are inspiring, if you are rejuvenating to your students, if you're humane, if you are mindful, you can't be replaced. There's no computer that exists and will exist in the near future that can be all these. Even if it could be programmed, it's not the same. I read once that any teacher who thinks that he or she can be replaced should be replaced. So as long as we are human, and as long as we do our job with passion, and we help students to find themselves and to keep learning every day of their life, I think we're going to be walking toward a great future. Definitely anticipating and welcoming change comes back to the idea of flexibility. All of you were somehow connected in many concepts, even though you were not, you had no previous meeting to talk about this. We have to adopt change knowingly, because the future is now. I'm just sharing some of the main ideas that stuck to my mind right now. We have some questions and remarks in the chat. I'm going to read Mr. Sobalbarros. The successful integration of AI in language teaching requires a thoughtful approach that considers the strengths of AI while preserving the essential elements of human interaction, cultural understanding, and effective pedagogy. Collaboration between educators, developers, and institutions is key to harnessing AI's potential in language education. Preserving the essential elements of human interaction, cultural understanding, and effective pedagogy, and collaboration. Yeah, okay, I read that already. His question is, how can educators effectively navigate the transition to a new lingua franca while ensuring high-quality English language education that promotes cross-cultural understanding and effective communication? Any of you can answer that? Dr. Reynolds.
I'll jump in on that one. I think the question I think it's useful to jump to the end of the question. And the end of the question asks, or says, our goal is ultimately to promote cross-cultural understanding and effective communication. And what we've always known as teachers is that we need to understand what it is we're teaching. So we analyze it, we research it, and we think about what's effective communication. And first of all, I think in our world today, effective communication is often multilingual. It's not always, but it often is, right? And when we learn it, when we study it, when we model that in the classroom, right? I mean, what we want our students to be is highly proficient multilinguals, right? And so it doesn't necessarily make sense to model being a highly proficient monolingual in the classroom, because we're actually denying them some of what they need. But at the same time, part of what a highly effective multilingual knows is when they need to suppress some of what they know, right? Because the person they're communicating with isn't going to understand them. And so they hold back some, right? But I think it's putting communication into that kind of context and helping. I think it's false if we're trying to communicate to students that, you're only going to speak or be operating in one language. I thought Paul made a great point when he's talking about research, that we need to realize that students need often to know how to write things that aren't academic. And we need to look at that kind of instruction because that's that sort of broader perspective on what is it we actually want our students to do and bring that into the classroom. And I would argue that now also includes this technology element, right? That's part of communication now. It is not replacing it, it's simply part of it. And so it needs to be part of what's happening in the classroom.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reynolds. I was reading about some of the Zuckerberg's Meta's new creation, which is a powerful interpreter and translator that will take thousands of languages from speech, and it can change it into speech in a different language immediately, and text to text, text to speech, speech to text, whatever you want, it will do it. So they're working on that. I think it was released a few weeks ago. So yeah, tools are here to stay, and we have to teach students how to adapt. I have another question by Dr. Gloria Ulloa. She says, teachers struggled reaching out to their students during the pandemic due to different reasons. However, technology allowed teachers to take education to faraway places. Now, after the pandemic, universities are struggling to bring students' minds back to person-to-person education. Students seem to be quiet and passive. What can be done to activate their minds, attitude, and motivation again? Boom, beautiful question. Who wants to answer? Dr. Khoury.
I noticed all this time that you are talking, and Paul did mention it, and that you're talking about students at the university level. And yesterday when you were talking, Paul, or you were discussing writing, you did talk about activities that are kind of boring and dull. Those, I usually call them the Middle Ages activities. The ones that many teachers still adhere to, and because writing, okay, you do this, well, what I would say, Gloria, and what would really help is first to encourage the teachers to get out of this idea that they are teaching university students. Because this idea, I'm teaching university students, well, they're not teaching Einsteins, nor are they teaching, academics that have, doctors. Okay, they're teaching university students, young people who, because life has changed, are ahead of us in many other things. What they need is to be approached in a much younger, much more modern, much more future today way to do fun activities. We keep thinking that only the children need fun activities and so on. No, I usually approach university students as I would approach teenagers who are really very difficult to teach. And I approach them this way. I don't, and I'm not doing it in a derogatory way. To the contrary, I don't even tell them, but I handle them and I treat them as people who want to have fun. And I want to have fun with them. So yes, we will be able, and all teachers will be able to bring life into the classroom if they don't go back to old practices. And if they feel young inside them and in here, and they are willing to give it out to them. Take it, Paul.
Right. That was a wonderful statement. You know, I think the major difference between ChatGPT and human teachers is that ChatGPT can respond to prompts, but it can't draw out emotions or experiences from the students. So as teachers, we need to reach out to students, listen to what they have to say, and tap into their past experience, present passion, and future aspirations, and then create assignments, activities that address those fundamental needs that students have. I think that's what makes it engaging and exciting for students.
And if I may add, I tried something on ChatGPT the other day, and it gave me the correct, as it said, according to EFL methodology, blah, 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 this is what you. However, do remember that there are emotions. Do remember that people want to feel this way and so on and so forth. So even ChatGPT says this.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. Yes, definitely. We as teachers have to do the magic, bring the magic into the classroom. I also think that individuality is a strong factor into motivating students. When they feel acknowledged individually, they tend to respond even better because the teacher saw their uniqueness somehow, and the teacher acknowledged me. And you know, dopamine was released, and neurotransmitters are running all crazy, and that makes me happy, and learning gets better. I want to participate, actually. So great, it's beautiful. I'm going to read some of YouTube's texts in the chat. A lot of greetings from different parts of Honduras, and we have Dr. Jenny Zelaya, who says, thanks to the 3 experts that shared their points of view with us. They were fantastic. I have a question, she says. There are teachers that are still challenged by technology. What could administrators do? Powerful question. Who wants to go ahead?
Challenge meaning they are kind of scared or what? Yeah, that.
I think one of the things you do is you get them to play, right? Just like what Lalika just said about how do you connect with students, you do the same thing with teachers, right? I don't pretend to have an authoritative, list of all the different kinds of activities that you can do with technology. I don't pretend to be an expert on language teaching with technology. But every time I get on there and I try something, I think, oh, I can imagine how I could use this in the classroom, right? But I have to do it in that sort of non-threatening way, right? And so bring it into bring it to the teachers' meeting. And who can come up with the most creative question to ask, right? And you got a prize for them at the end of the meeting. And play with it, right? And don't start out by expecting them to be the expert on it, I think is part of it as well. Paul, Lalika, what would you add?
Well,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay, so I agree with Dudley. And in my workshop, one of the contrasts that I drew was between building block type of knowledge making versus playing with materials, the artistic creative process learning. And when we learn to do something, we have to play with the materials, become familiar with the tools, and enjoy doing it before we can do anything grand, and then implement it in a small way. And then if it's successful, build on it and keep adding more and more, right? We are afraid of something for various reasons. There may be specific fear triggers, but also we are afraid of something that we don't know. people are afraid of ghosts, but they don't know what ghosts are. And that's precisely why they are afraid of ghosts, right? So once we get to know, why the ghost exists, sometimes we become sympathetic. You've seen these horror stories where the ghost suddenly becomes a poor soul that needs to be rescued. So learn the technology, befriend it, and play with it, and then think about how you might use it. Don't try to force the use of technology from the beginning.
And what do we mean challenged? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What somebody says this person is challenged, the other one is not. It really, some of us use technology a lot, others do not. I'll tell you what I would say. As long, who knows, probably this teacher or those teachers who are challenged, they are probably, and if they do give heart and soul into their classroom and to their students, I don't care how they do it, as long as they approach their students the way we would like them to, in a humane way, in an understanding way. As long as the students learn and want to learn, they can do it any way they like. Nobody says we need to use technology all of the time.
This is a surreal experience. I'm getting the goosebumps because this is so enriching to every teacher who is listening. So we thank you for that. I think this is a clear message to school and educational institution administrators to give teachers a break too, because teachers are usually and constantly required to fill out a lot of forms and statistics and papers and reports and probably dull and not shiny things anymore because they're not so useful to education, and their time is just sucked away from them, and the teachers are usually overwhelmed with useless things. And we miss the chance of using our time for playing with tools and discovering new things. So acknowledging teachers' individuality, just as we said, we should acknowledge students' individuality, is also part of the growth that education needs. Every teacher can be entitled to bring education into students' lives their own way, as long as it is effective and authentic. Excellent. Before we jump into the closing ceremony, I want to thank our experts. I want to thank university authorities and all the teachers who are connected in YouTube attending this panel. I hope you had a great time. I read a comment by Amy Lopez, I think. I'm really grateful for being part of this panel. It is amazing how they could agree in every term. It's such an honor. So these are the comments we're getting in YouTube. This will be an unforgettable moment. I think all of us feel grateful to be here. I'm going to ask you to turn on your cameras and look at the camera, because one of our committee members is going to take a screenshot of all the cameras gallery. So say cheese. If you have a mask and you want to wear it, no, I don't think so. Is the screenshot taken, Tevin? Beautiful. Thank you very much. So do you have any other comments or questions so far? No. The panel is officially closed. Excellent, excellent final session for these 3 days journey. It was a beautiful conference, our 13th conference. So right now, I officially welcome you to our closing ceremony. It's been such an adventure. Every session, being able to decide what presentation to join, just picking and choosing, and then planning about watching a repetition if you couldn't attend a live session. Everything in a conference is always an adventure. And we are so happy that we could make it possible for all of you. The organizing committee is very pleased, although tired, but pleased. Is that exhaustion that is satisfactory and pleasant when you feel so tired but so happy because you made it. I want to acknowledge the organizing committee, our president, Ms. Clara Chavez, myself, I'm the vice president of the conference, Tomas Monge. Dr. Ulloa is part of the organizing committee as a former president and part of the founding, valuable person who is always working for this conference. Sally Soto, our secretary, she never gets tired. She never gets tired. That's what she says, but I know she's tired. She was in touch with you throughout all this process. Like 6 months ago, we started with the communication. We have subcommittees. Sorry, broadcasting and transmission, Mr. Oscar Sovalbarro and Mr. David Raudales, two powerful people who made this possible technically. And they had a team of technicians who were in charge of different sessions because they couldn't obviously have all the live sessions on at the same time. I think they could, but they didn't. They wanted to expand and to share their knowledge. So we thank them for all their work. We had a communications. I'm sorry, my voice is dying. We had a communications subcommittee. It was led by Tevin Padilla, Miss Tevin Padilla. She did a great job, along with Miss Fabiola Calero and Miss Lynette Escalante. Everything you saw on Facebook, those reels, those biographies, those pictures, every post was worked out by them. They are the faces behind that. I want to thank the ushers that we had, some teachers from different parts of our country, and some of our students did an outstanding job presenting every one of our experts in every presentation and helping them lead the presentation and read questions and so on. I want to thank the head of our department for making everything possible for us, being right next to us, shoulder to shoulder, helping us with everything we need, because the head of the department is the one who communicates with people, and we needed her so many times, and she was always there. And obviously, UPNFM, as all the authorities, are also part of the coverage that we get from the institution. And our sponsors, we had Macmillan as sponsors, and Mr. Raudales's company, because he's a successful businessman and he decided to sponsor us, not only helping as a technician, he decided to sponsor also the conference with his communication company. Thank you all. It's been a great journey, and we are so happy and so satisfied with this. I'm going to ask our president of the conference, Ms. Clara Suazo, to address the audience with her closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tomás Monge. I will do this in another way.
Thank you so much. I want to share with you this warm closing. Dear colleagues, as this conference comes to an end, I encourage you to reflect on everything that we have learned during these past few days. This conference has opened the floor to more conversations on the teachings of English in our country and worldwide through a more critical lens, considering all the challenges that we educators have to face in a post-pandemic world. I am grateful for having shared this space with each one of you. Our theme this year, New Perspectives in TEFL in the post-pandemic era, allowed us to explore topics related to technology, multilingualism, multiculturalism, hybrid instruction, and much more. Throughout this event, we had the opportunity to learn from our exceptional keynote speakers, special guests, and presenters whose knowledge and expertise made this event a success. However, the true essence of this conference is not solely in the words of our speakers, but rather in the collective experiences and the diverse perspectives of all who attend this event. To our audience of English educators from Honduras and various corners of the globe, your presence has been the cornerstone of this 13th International Conference for English of Teachers, and for that we extend our sincere gratitude. As we move forward, let us recognize that we are not only participants or speakers, but rather agents of transformation in the English language teaching field, both in Honduras and worldwide. The knowledge gained over these past few days must resonate within our classroom and teaching communities, shaping the approach we adopt in language education. Our deepest appreciation goes out to the United States Embassy in Tegucigalpa for sponsoring our International Conference for Teachers of English once again. Without your valuable support, this event couldn't happen the success it was. Thank you to our Universidad Pedagógica Nacional Francisco Morazán for hosting this event. Thank you to our distinguished keynote speakers and presenters for sharing your knowledge and time with us. And thank you to the excellent organizing committee and everyone who made this event possible. Let us carry the spirit of this conference with us until we meet in 2025 for our 14th International Conference for Teachers of English, where we will discuss fresh concepts, confront new challenges, and once again, get together to celebrate our shared passion for teaching English. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President, for your words. I'm going to share my screen so we can listen to some closing remarks that were sent by our Vice President of Academic Affairs, Mr. Bartolome Chinchilla.
Buenas tardes a todos. Es un honor estar aquí hoy cerrando con gratitud y emoción la 13ª Conferencia Internacional para Profesores de Inglés. Quiero agradecer a cada uno de ustedes por haber sido parte de este evento de gran importancia organizado por el Departamento de Enseñanza de Lenguas de la Universidad Pedagógica Nacional Francisco Morazán. Este evento anual se ha convertido en un faro de conocimiento y crecimiento para todos los profesionales dedicados a la enseñanza del inglés en todos los niveles del sistema educativo. Este es un evento que busca brindar la capacitación y la actualización que necesitamos para mantenernos a la vanguardia en nuestra labor educativa. Y este año, a pesar de los desafíos que todos conocemos, hemos demostrado que la pasión por la educación trasciende las barreras físicas. Quiero destacar el compromiso de nuestra universidad con la formación continua de sus egresados y la mejora constante de la enseñanza del inglés en un momento en que la educación está en constante evolución. El fortalecimiento de nuestra labor es crucial para el desarrollo de nuestro país. Durante estos 3 días hemos sido testigos de un intercambio de conocimientos sin fronteras. Es un logro notorio haber contado con la presencia de expertos de diversas partes del mundo, demostrando que la enseñanza del inglés es un lenguaje global que nos une en nuestra búsqueda de la excelencia educativa. Mis más sinceras felicitaciones van hacia las autoridades del Departamento de Enseñanza de Lenguas, así como a los conferencistas, a los panelistas, a facilitadores, docentes y estudiantes. Además, quiero reconocer al comité organizador por su dedicación incansable para que este evento académico haya tenido el éxito esperado. También es importante mencionar y agradecer el patrocinio de la Embajada de los Estados Unidos de América en Honduras y a otras instituciones que han apoyado este evento. Su compromiso con la educación es un ejemplo a seguir. Cierro esta 13ª Conferencia Internacional para Profesores de Inglés con una profunda sensación de gratitud y de satisfacción. Nuestro camino educativo no termina aquí, sino que se renueva con el conocimiento y la inspiración que hemos compartido. Sigamos trabajando juntos para forjar un futuro brillante a través de la educación de calidad. A todos ustedes les envío un abrazo lleno de gratitud y reconocimiento. Felicitaciones por su participación y dedicación en este magno evento académico. A todos, muchas gracias. Feliz día.
We thank our Vice President of Academic Affairs, Mr. Bartolome Chinchilla, for his closing words. I think we all know that feeling of mixed sadness and tiredness when a great vacation is over and you're heading to the airport, going back home. I think that's exactly what I feel right now. I feel the tiny sadness of closing this beautiful conference, but I am happy because in 2025, we're going to have our 14th conference and we might see some of our experts in person. So that gives me hope. And it gives me that feeling of looking forward to that moment. So we thank you for your attendance. We thank our experts. We thank everybody for everything they did for our conference. I want to remind the audience that you need to go to the SWAY presentation, to the SWAY website, reach the bottom of everything. And at the bottom, there is a link for an evaluation forms. So if you could fill it out for us and let us know what you thought of this conference, it's going to be valuable for the next one. Thank you all. It's been a great pleasure, and this is goodbye. Have a great weekend.
And we give a big applause to David.
David is awesome. Just right with Mr. Sobalbarro, they made the magic happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.